Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling, well, one of the really big questions, aren't we? About human behavior. Are we born a certain way, or does our environment totally shape us, especially when it comes to antisocial choices?
Exactly. We're diving into what are called trait theories. It's this fundamental idea that, our behavior is influenced by these unique, pretty stable patterns, physical and mental ones. They make up who you are, essentially.
Like an individual blueprint.
Yeah, I could put it that way. And historically, people started thinking about this by linking weird stuff in the mind directly to, well, crime, breaking laws.
That's moved on a lot since then, right?
Oh, definitely. It's much more nuanced now. We've shifted from just looking at biology to seeing how these internal traits actually interact with the world around us.
Okay, so that's our mission today. We're going to trace how this thinking evolved, starting with some, let's say, dated ideas like the born criminal,
Right.
and we'll follow that thread all the way up to the modern stuff, the interactive models. Moving beyond just biology to biosocial and psychological theories.
And you really have to start with Cesare Lombroso. He's kind of the big name associated with biological positivism.
Lombroso, yeah.
He was really the first one who tried, scientifically anyway, to see if people who broke laws, especially serious ones, were, physically different.
And that led to his concept of the born criminal, didn't it? The idea that they had these atavistic anomalies.
That's the term, yeah. Primitive traits.
Mhm.
Things like big jaws or weirdly shaped heads. He thought they were like evolutionary throwbacks.
Basically trying to slap a scientific label on people based on how they looked, which sounds, well, pretty problematic today.
Extremely problematic, and that's exactly why modern criminologists just flat out reject that purely deterministic view. Nobody seriously thinks you're just born bad in that simple way anymore.
So what's the modern view then? What replaced Lombroso's idea?
The key word now is interaction. The consensus today is that it's about environmental conditions constantly interacting with our individual human traits. That combination influences behavior.
Interaction. Okay. So is there a specific term for that?
Yes, biosocial theory. That's the umbrella term. It really just assumes this link exists between your physical and mental traits, your social environment, and then, how you behave.
I've heard that analogy. Biology loads the gun, environment pulls the trigger. Is that kind of capturing it?
That's a pretty good way to put it, yeah. It captures the interactive element. And under that biosocial umbrella, you also find sociobiology.
Okay, what's that focus on?
Sociobiology looks at how our sort of baseline biological and genetic conditions affect how we learn social behaviors, how we perceive them. It often centers on this deep-seated evolutionary need for, well, our genes to survive, and sometimes maybe dominate.
So just to be clear, contemporary trait theories aren't saying this person will be a criminal because of X trait. It's more subtle.
Much more subtle. The focus is on how basic drives things like aggression, maybe violence, impulsivity, how possessing those to a stronger degree might make someone more susceptible to criminal behavior, especially if they're also in a negative social situation. Each person is unique physically and mentally.
Right. Susceptibility, not destiny. That makes sense.
And that brings us nicely to the specific physical conditions that can play a role working alongside the environment.
You mean like our internal chemistry?
Exactly. The source material talks a lot about biochemical conditions, things that can affect us throughout life.
Okay, there's probably a long list, but what are some of the really significant examples? The ones that maybe have the most direct impact?
Well, let's maybe highlight a couple of key areas. First, think about diet and metabolism. There's research suggesting links between things like really high sugar intake, poor nutrition generally, or conditions like hypoglycemia, that's low glucose metabolism, and behaviors like aggression or hyperactivity, mood swings too.
Huh. So what you eat could genuinely affect your likelihood of acting out.
The evidence suggests it can play a role, yeah. And second, hormonal influences. Things like premenstrual syndrome in women or fluctuations in hormones like testosterone in men. These are studied because there seem to be links to emotional volatility, maybe aggression.
Wow. It kind of reframes things, doesn't it? Like maybe the first step for some behavioral issues could be looking at diet or hormones, not just, therapy.
It suggests a more holistic approach might be needed sometimes, yes. But it's not just chemicals, it's also the brain's structure and function.
Right. The hardware itself, what's that called?
Neurophysiological conditions. And maybe the most critical concept here is executive brain function.
Executive function.
Yeah.
Like the brain's CEO.
That's a great way to think about it. It handles the high-level stuff. Planning, self-control, stopping yourself from doing impulsive things. And there's a pretty significant link found between impairments in this executive function area and antisocial behavior.
Okay, is there a specific condition that really illustrates this link? Something people might have heard of.
Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, is probably the clearest example in this context.
Right, ADHD.
Yeah, it's characterized by that trio: difficulty paying attention, hyperactivity, and crucially, impulsivity. That struggle with impulse control, specifically, is often connected back to differences in brain chemistry.
Ah, the neurotransmitters.
Exactly. Chemicals like dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, they all play complex roles.
If we had to pick one neurotransmitter that's most directly linked in the sources to impulse control or aggression, what would it be?
Serotonin comes up a lot. Consistently, studies find that lower levels of serotonin are linked with increased aggression and a reduced ability to manage mood and impulses. Dopamine is also important for reward seeking, which can tie into risky behaviors too.
So, differences in these basic brain chemicals could make someone find it much harder to resist certain environmental pressures or temptations.
That's the implication, yes.
Yeah.
It affects your baseline response. And speaking of response, that ties into another theory, arousal theory.
Arousal theory, how does that fit in?
Well, it suggests that some people's nervous systems just function differently in response to stimuli. Maybe it's genetics, maybe environment, probably both. Their baseline arousal level might be naturally very low.
Low arousal, meaning they're kind of understimulated.
Exactly. Measured by things like heart rate or brain activity. So the theory goes, these individuals might actively seek out intense experiences, risky stuff, aggressive encounters, even criminal acts just to feel, well, normal, to get their arousal up to a level that feels adequate.
So they're almost chasing the thrill because their default state is boredom.
That's one interpretation, yeah. Seeking stimulation that others might find unpleasant or frightening.
Okay, let's switch gears slightly. We've talked biology, chemistry, arousal. What about genetics, inheritance?
Yeah.
How strong is the evidence that antisocial traits get passed down?
It's complex, definitely not straightforward like inheriting eye color, but the evidence does suggest some characteristics linked to antisocial behavior might be genetically inherited, at least indirectly. The most persuasive evidence often comes from adoption studies.
Right, adoption studies. Why are they so important compared to just looking at, say, criminal parents and their kids?
Because they help untangle nature from nurture. They look at kids adopted shortly after birth who have no contact with their biological parents, and these studies often find that even with totally different upbringing environments, there's still some statistical relationship between the biological parents' behavior patterns, like criminality, and the child's later behavior.
Even with zero contact.
Even with zero contact, it strongly suggests there's some biological or genetic component at play, independent of the environment they were raised in.
Wow, okay. And there's another related idea, the contagion effect.
Yeah, that's more about the interaction within a family.
Yeah.
The idea is if you have a genetic predisposition towards certain traits, maybe impulsivity, and you also have an older sibling who's already acting out being antisocial.
You might copy them.
Exactly. The sibling's behavior kind of activates or amplifies that predisposition. It's like a behavioral echo chamber within the household. Genetics meets a readily available model.
Okay, connecting this back to the bigger picture. Evolution. There's evolutionary theory in criminology too, right? Which explores the, frankly, quite controversial idea that maybe traits like violence or aggression were actually useful, evolutionarily speaking.
Yes, that's part of the discussion. The sources do mention the specific evolutionary models. Now, it's really important here to just report impartially what these theories propose. For example, there's Rushton's theory of race and evolution, which tries to link observed statistical differences in crime rates between racial groups to evolutionary adaptation.
That sounds incredibly sensitive.
It is, and highly controversial, often criticized. We're just noting its existence as presented in the sources. There are other theories, too, like the cheater theory.
Cheater theory.
It suggests that evolutionarily, it might have been advantageous for some males to have genes leading to low parental involvement, basically, prioritizing spreading their genes widely over sticking around to raise offspring. The core idea across these theories is that maybe certain traits we now see as antisocial could have offered a reproductive edge way back in our evolutionary past.
Okay, so wrapping up this whole biosocial section, it's covered a lot, from brain chemistry to evolution. It's technical, sometimes definitely controversial. What's the biggest hurdle these theories face? The main criticism?
I'd say there are two main ones. First, the ethical concern you touched on. Some theories have been accused of being dysfunctional, even racist, by trying to categorize people based on biological traits they can't change.
Right.
And second, maybe more damaging from a scientific view, is that many specific biological claims just haven't been adequately tested empirically. There's often a lack of really solid, repeatable data to prove the exact mechanisms they propose.
So lots of ideas, not always enough proof.
That's a fair summary of the criticism. But the counter-argument, the defense, is that the fundamental idea of interaction is sound. Behavior is likely a product of biology and environment working together. That core interactive model holds up better.
Okay, so the engine might be biological, but it needs software to run, which brings us to the psychological side.
Exactly. Psychological trait theories. How we think, feel, process the world.
And the classic starting point here is psychodynamic theory, right? Freud and all that.
Yep, that's the foundation. It focuses on those instinctive drives we're born with, how our personality develops through stages, and that famous structure, the id, the ego, and the superego.
Can you give us the quick version? The id is?
The id is like the demanding toddler within us, all about immediate pleasure, basic instincts, wants it now.
Okay, superego.
The superego is the internalized parent, the conscience, full of morals, rules, guilt, shoulds, and shouldn'ts.
And the ego is stuck in the middle.
Pretty much. The ego is the referee, trying to balance the id's demands with the superego's rules and the constraints of reality. It tries to find realistic ways to satisfy the id without getting into trouble.
And problems arise when this balancing act goes wrong, especially traced back to childhood, like Freud's psychosexual stages.
Exactly. Unresolved conflicts during those early stages, oral, anal, phallic, are seen as the roots of adult problems. If the ego doesn't manage these conflicts well, you can end up with things like deep-seated inferiority complexes, ongoing identity crises, or what we call conduct disorders, which can definitely lead to antisocial choices.
And closely related is attachment theory.
Yes, very related. It focuses specifically on the crucial importance of that early bond between a child and their primary caregiver. The ability, or importantly, the failure to form secure attachments early on has really long-lasting psychological consequences. Makes you vulnerable.
Failure to connect early leaves scars. Okay, moving from those deep internal processes to things that are more learned. Behavioral theory.
Right. Particularly social learning theory. This one is quite straightforward and honestly pretty actionable.
How so?
It basically argues that aggression and antisocial behaviors aren't necessarily innate, they're learned, primarily through behavior modeling.
Modeling, like copying.
Exactly. You see it, you learn it. Kids especially learn by observing family members interacting, seeing how people behave in their environment, even watching violence or aggression in the mass media. If they see a behavior, especially if it seems successful or gets rewarded, they imitate it.
Simple but powerful. And that leads into cognitive theory, which isn't just about what you learn, but how your brain processes information, perception, problem solving.
Precisely. This is super important. Cognitive theory looks at our mental processes. Two key ideas here. First, moral and intellectual development. Think about stages of moral reasoning.
Like Kohlberg stages.
Kind of, yeah. The basic idea is that people who operate at the lowest level, like they only obey the law because they're scared of getting caught and punished, are seen as more likely to commit crimes than people who understand why laws exist and see them as beneficial for everyone.
That's a huge difference in thinking.
It really is. The second main part is social information processing. This is about how we interpret social cues and decide how to respond. We all develop these mental scripts based on our childhood experiences.
Scripts, like pre-programmed responses.
Sort of.
Yeah.
If a child learns faulty scripts, maybe they learn that the only way to deal with frustration is to lash out, or that everyone is always hostile, then their perception of social situations gets skewed. They might misinterpret neutral cues as threatening, and their go-to response becomes antisocial because their underlying cognitive process is flawed.
So the input might be normal, but the processing software is buggy.
That's a good analogy, yeah.
Yeah.
Faulty mental software leading to bad output.
Okay, let's bring this towards stable characteristics. Personality and offending. There seems to be a pretty clear link between certain enduring personality patterns and people who commit crimes repeatedly, right?
Yeah.
Chronic offenders.
Yes, the research points strongly in that direction. The key pattern identified is often called the antisocial personality.
What defines that?
It's defined as this pervasive pattern of disregarding or violating the rights of others. Crucially, it starts early, often in childhood or adolescence, and continues into adulthood. It's not just a phase.
And within that, we sometimes hear the terms psychopath and sociopath. Are they the same thing? The sources seem to distinguish them.
They're often used interchangeably in popular culture, but clinically, and in these sources, there's often a subtle distinction made. It's viewed more as a continuum, though.
Okay, how can we simplify that distinction based on the sources?
A simple way to think about it might be wiring versus trauma. A sociopath is often seen as more a product of their environment, a really bad upbringing, neglect, abuse. Their antisocial behavior stems from that damage. A psychopath, on the other hand, is often viewed as having something inherently different about their internal makeup, their wiring, like a profound lack of empathy, manipulativeness, that seems more innate, less purely reactive to trauma.
So one might be more made, the other more born with that disposition, though it's a spectrum.
That's a rough but helpful way to conceptualize the distinction often drawn, yes. And researchers use various psychological tests like the MMPI, CPI, MPQ mentioned in the sources to try and measure these personality traits and predict risk.
Okay, one last major trait area we have to touch on. Intelligence, or IQ, and its link to crime.
Yeah.
This has always been controversial.
Hugely controversial. First, intelligence itself is just broadly defined as the ability to reason, solve problems, think abstractly.
Right, and the debate.
It basically splits into the classic nature versus nurture camps. The nature theory argues intelligence is largely inherited, genetically determined. And historically, some researchers linked low IQ scores directly to a higher likelihood of criminal behavior.
In the nurture side.
The nurture theory argues that while biology plays some role, intelligence is primarily shaped by social factors, environment. So low IQ scores might reflect things like poor schooling, poverty, lack of opportunity, or even cultural biases built into the IQ tests themselves, rather than innate low ability.
And we definitely need to flag the IQ controversy.
Absolutely. Many researchers question the validity of the whole IQ crime link. They point to problems like potentially spurious data, research methods that weren't great, and the difficulty of separating intelligence from all those other socioeconomic factors. So that link is far from being a settled fact. It's really debated.
Okay, so acknowledging all that complexity and controversy, how do these trait theories, both biological and psychological, actually influence what we do about crime, the policy implications?
This is where it gets practical. These theories directly shape crime control strategies, especially around prevention.
How so? What kinds of programs come out of this way of thinking?
Well, they usually fall into three categories based on timing. First, you have primary prevention programs. These are seen as the most proactive, maybe the most important.
Primary meaning, before any crime happens.
Exactly. They aim to treat personal problems before they could possibly manifest as crime. Think about things like universal preschool programs, nutritional assistance for kids, screening for learning disabilities, easily accessible youth mental health services, addressing potential risk factors early.
Okay, makes sense. What's next?
Secondary prevention programs. These target individuals or groups already identified as being at higher risk for breaking the law, maybe kids showing early signs of aggression or those in really unstable family situations.
What do these programs do?
They provide more focused treatment. Things like counseling, mentoring programs, maybe social skills training, intervening when risk factors are clear but before serious offending occurs.
Got it. And the third type?
Tertiary prevention programs. This is after a crime has already happened. It's about preventing reoffending or recidivism.
So things like?
Mandatory counseling as part of probation, drug treatment programs in prison or as an alternative, job training for ex-offenders, aftercare programs when someone is released, trying to address the underlying issues that contributed to the crime in the first place, even after the fact.
Okay, so primary, secondary, tertiary prevention, all flowing from the idea that individual traits interacting with environment lead to behavior.
That's the connection, yes.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the main thing you, the listeners, should take away? For me, it's that synthesis. It's never just biology or just environment.
Absolutely. The modern understanding, drawing from all these trait theories, really demands we see behavior as this ongoing dynamic interaction between your unique internal world, your biology, your psychology, and the external world you navigate. It's that constant interplay.
The interplay is key.
It is. And thinking about those policy implications we just discussed, primary, secondary, tertiary, it seems the weight of the evidence and perhaps the most hope lies in those earlier interventions.
Before problems become entrenched.
Right. Which leaves us with a final thought, really a question for you to consider. If behavior truly is this product of biology and environment interacting, where should society focus its investment for prevention? Should it be more on, say, biochemical interventions like nutritional support? Or neurophysiological support like early screening for impulse control issues? Or more on psychological support like accessible therapy and attachment focused parenting programs? Especially for young people when these traits might still be forming.
Where'd we get the biggest return on investment for preventing problems down the line?
Exactly. Thinking about those primary and secondary prevention levels, what approach, informed by these trait theories, offers the best chance to positively shape those interactions between the individual and their environment? That's the challenge these theories pose for how we structure our communities and support systems.